Welcome to Girl Dad, the podcast, the essential podcast for fathers navigating the complex but rewarding journey of raising daughters. I'm your host, Madeline Anderson, and I'm thrilled to bring you honest conversations with dads and daughters, sharing heartfelt stories, actionable advice, and real daughter perspectives that will help you be the best girl dad you can be. Hello, and welcome to Girl Dad, the podcast. This is the first solo episode where I will be diving deep into one specific topic and just doing it solo. So today's topic is work-life balance, and I chose this topic to be the first episode because this is something that dads always ask me about, and it's something that came up in almost every single interview that I had with dads for the book. So I'm really excited to share some actionable takeaways for you on how to achieve work-life balance. So the goal for today is actually twofold. First, I want you as fathers to feel better about your work-life balance, and we'll just get into what work-life balance means for you and how you can feel better about the time split between work and quote unquote life. Okay. And then the second thing is I want you to be able to understand work-life balance from the perspective of your daughter. So we'll really talk about what work means to her and how you can show up best for her in terms of how you communicate work, how you set expectations, and how you include her in your world of work. So that's really all we're going to be discussing today, but we're going to go really deep into this topic and make sure that all of your work-life balance questions are answered and that we have some fun talking about this conversation that seems to be pretty daunting for a lot of dads. So with that, we will begin. So first, I wanted to talk about your perspective on your work-life balance and really make sure that you feel that you are achieving work-life balance. Now, this is something that is so unique to everybody, and it's not something that you just achieve one day and then you've checked it off and you're good, you have work-life balance, right? This is something that is continuously ever evolving and something that you have to continue to work on, but find ways to find peace in it always, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the hours spent, it's about how you feel about your balance. I want to start off by thinking of the visual that most people have about work-life balance. And that visual is a teeter-totter. And on one side is work, and on the other side is life. And I think the problem is people visualize that as work-life balance, and the amount that they're putting on each side of this teeter-totter is the unit is time. And that's really not fair. We are setting ourselves up for disaster and failure if we are judging work-life balance based on time spent at work and time spent with our families or on quote unquote life, right? So instead, I would like you to scrap this visual of the teeter-totter and instead try to think about work and life as two buckets that you're working towards. And what you want to do is set specific and actionable goals within those two buckets separately and work to achieve your goals or exceed your goals. And don't make them so impossible that you're, again, setting yourself up for failure, but make them something that you'd be proud of and feel good about. Don't set, 100 goals for each one. You want to make sure that it makes sense for you. And that looks different for everybody. And that's something that you can achieve no matter what. No matter what job you have, no matter how old you are, no matter how old your kids are, that is something that is evergreen and something that you can keep checking in on. So maybe every year you do a yearly diagnostic on your goals and how you're benchmarking and what you're benchmarking against and how you're achieving them and if you're exceeding them. And then you can refine and set new goals and update it accordingly. Maybe it was a really busy year and you went on a lot of trips and had all these things going on and you weren't able to meet your goals, and that's okay. And maybe you need to adjust. Or maybe you absolutely crushed your goals and you felt even more motivated. And now you want to raise the bar and have a more exciting and more challenging year, but you're up for it, Again, it's so different for everyone, but I think the main takeaway there is just that you have to have something to benchmark yourself against, or you will always feel like you're drowning and there's no end in sight, and there's just, more work, more time that you need to be spending with your children, and it just becomes extremely overwhelming. And I think there's a lot of guilt that goes along with that, with dads who work a lot and maybe are spending time away from the family when really it doesn't need to be something that you feel guilty around. In fact, I never tell dads to work less. I think that's rarely the solution to achieving work-life balance, but it's also, again, it plays into that guilt. And I think dads who work really hard and are really busy can still be incredible dads. And I'll speak to my dad's story in a minute, but I think the main takeaway there is just that you can absolutely achieve work-life balance by working a lot. You just need to really hone in on what your goals are around work, what your goals are around time with the family and things that you want to accomplish there, and put them on the calendar. If your goal for your life is to have a weekly father-daughter date, put it on the calendar, make it happen, and hold yourself accountable. And you'll feel better once you check those goals off your list, and you're feeling like you're thriving in that category. And I've heard dads have had really great success with this. So I would highly encourage you to give this a try. And please reach out if this is something that works well for you, or even if it doesn't work well for you and you have any suggestions. I'm here as a resource to bounce ideas off of, and also to share these ideas with other dads that it will resonate with. So that is really the work-life balance for you discussion. Now, I want to talk about work-life balance in the eyes of your daughter and how you can set yourself up in your relationship with your daughter when it comes to work, especially if you're a busy dad. So, when I think about this, I like to think back to when your daughter is young. And whether your daughter is young or she was young, it just helps you understand the female brain, but especially the young female brain. Okay, so when your daughter is young, she knows that there's this thing called work. And she knows that dad spends a lot of time on this thing called work. And sometimes it's higher on his priority list than she is. Now, the trouble comes into play when you find yourself speaking negatively about work. Maybe you're complaining about your boss or your coworkers or your employees and how stressful it is and how much you don't like what you're doing, or this project that you don't like. And what she hears is this: there's this thing called work. Dad spends a lot of time on it. He doesn't seem to like it, but it's higher on his priority list than I am. Now, how do you think that makes her feel? Right? There's this thing you don't even like, but you seem to care about it more than her. What does that mean for her? What is the story that she's telling herself about how you feel about her? Right? And so the good news is all of these narratives that are in her head can be absolutely shattered with just communication, expectations, and inclusion. I call it the framework, usually because I have corny jokes like that, but really it comes down to framing the concept of work for your daughter so she understands what you're doing and why you do it. And then there's no negative emotions or feelings for her around work. So starting off with communication, I think this is just absolutely essential. Your daughter should know what you do for work, why you do it. You should be able to talk about work in a free way. You could even include her in on some calls, or just have her observe the calls if she's old enough to understand, or sit her on your lap and show her something that you're working on in your computer when she's younger, and make her feel like she understands exactly what it is that you do, so that when you're going off to work, it's not this mysterious thing that she's enamored by and feels like this thing is pulling you away from her, taking you away from her, and you don't even like it. Like some girls, they actually feel so sorry for their dads who are going off to work, when really they should feel pride. They should feel excitement for their dads that are going out there, they're providing for the family, they're bettering themselves, they're educating themselves, they're, you know, in their lane thriving, and that's what we want for our dads. But when we're young and don't really understand what it is, it can be this daunting thing. And I think part of it comes from just the evolution of work and what it was back then versus what it is today. And I think back in the day, you would really know what your dad did because a lot of the jobs were more physical or easy to understand because it's tangible, right? Like, maybe your dad owned a gas station or he worked on the farm or it was something that you could go see and understand. But now with, tech and all these other kinds of jobs, whether it's remote or in the office, it's just there's a lot of conceptual roles that us daughters might have a hard time grasping. And so it's just this thing called work and we just leave it at that. But the more that you can communicate with your daughter and help her understand exactly what you do, again, the more she gets it and she feels excited for you and she feels like she's a part of it. So it's not something that's divisive. It's something that she can even speak to. She might tell her friends what you do for work, and it really becomes a positive thing. Okay, the second part of the framework is expectations. So this is really all about just setting yourself up for success. And I always like to think about this visual of a dad who's coming home from work between 5 and 6 p.m. He knows he'll be home sometime in that range. But the dad who says 5 p.m. is when he'll be home is setting himself up for failure because even if he really, really wants to be home at 5 p.m. and he has the intention of being home at 5 p.m., if there is a chance he's going to be late and it's going to be 6, he is setting himself up for failure because on the other end of that, you've got his daughter who's waiting. She sees the clock strike 5. She's excited. And then she's feeling hopeless. She's feeling abandoned. She's feeling left alone. She feels like there's this thing that's way more important than she is. And she starts spinning these stories in her mind that really are not your fault whatsoever. But women do tend to storytell, and these stories can snowball into these emotions that are very real for the daughter. And so, um, you know, even though you did not mean anything by coming home late, maybe there's a story in her head that says that she's not a priority for you. So instead, what if you said 6 p.m. is when you're going to be home and you show up at 5 p.m.? Imagine how excited and happy she is that you're home early and that you cared about her extra to come home, even though, again, these are just thoughts that your daughter may be having, but I want you to be aware of them because, men and women think very differently, and that's completely fine, and that is just the truth, right? So I think for men, if you want to understand your daughter better and know how to show up for her best, it's important to hear these things about how she might be thinking. And I think this is one of those things where one of those great examples where she might be having this entirely different story in her head than you, and you are completely oblivious to this story because you would never think this way. Um, but she might. So again, expectations is all about just setting yourself up for success and just setting proper expectations around time spent on work, when you're going to be on, when you're going to be off, those boundaries that you're going to set for yourself and sticking to them. Maybe relay those messages to your family, your daughter, so she understands like, okay, this is time for dad to work. Not gonna bug him during these hours or whatever. And she knows and respects that about you rather than having lack of clarity and lack of expectations and just really feeling like this work is kind of messy. It's all over the place. And she doesn't know when she's allowed to communicate with you or spend time with you. And she feels a lot of uncertainty. I think really that's what it comes down to is just help her understand when you're going to be at work and when you're going to be available for her. And if you've already done step 1, which is the communication, she won't feel negatively towards work in general. So having those those clear lines as to when you're going to be unavailable is totally fine. She's like, "Oh, dad's at work, he's doing this. It's great." And then when he comes home, it's time for me or whatever those boundaries that you have are. So, it's clearly conveying those and setting the proper expectations is step 2. Okay, so the third part of the framework is inclusion. And this is really all about including your daughter in your world. And this, of course, includes your work world, but also just life in general and letting her get to know you. My dad did this in a lot of different ways, but one good example is that my dad loves to play golf. He always has. And when he had me, he could have easily given up golf because that's a lot of time away, especially because he's a very, very busy and hard worker. He already spent a ton of time at work in the past, but instead of just giving up golf or instead of playing with his friends and sacrificing time with me, he would bring me along with him. And when I was young, he bought me a little Snoopy set. It just had a driver, a putter, and an iron. And it was really just to make me feel included, right? Like instead of just having me sit in the car and do nothing, at least I had a golf set and I felt like I was a part of it. I felt like I was wanted and I felt like he wanted me to be there. And that was everything. And I think that's a really big takeaway is, make her feel included in your life. And when she does, then you working long hours doesn't matter because she knows you want her. She knows that you're prioritizing her and you care about her so much, right? So, but going back to the golf example, I would love playing with my Snoopy set. And when I got older, or as I got older, my dad started teaching me how to play. So there would be more shots that I would be included in. And it started out with putting, and then it was chipping and putting, and then it was irons. And then pretty soon I was driving with him and we would play full rounds together. And that was so fun for me to get to learn and to feel like I was a part of his world. And fast forward to today, I just got married a couple months ago and I love golf so much. I played in the high school team and I credit my dad to all of it, of course. But I love golf so much that I made the Thursday of our wedding a golf tournament. So we did a 4-person scramble. We had, I think it was 6 or 7 teams. It was so fun. And of course, I requested my dad to be on my team. And so he got to witness me get a solo eagle, which was so fun and just thrilling, honestly. It was a par 4 and I drove the green and one putted and I could just tell how proud he was of me. And he was telling everybody afterwards, like, oh, Madeline got an eagle and which made me feel so proud to hear it coming from him too. So anyways, I think that's just a great full circle story because him including me in his world from a young age led me to including him in my world, like wanting him on my team at my wedding because like that's my dad and I love him so much. And yeah, it's just super full circle. So yes, my dad included me in his world and golf is such a great example, but there are a lot of other examples that I could give. But I think going back to the work-life balance conversation, he really included me in his work world. So he would always talk about his projects and what he had going on at work and things that he was excited about. I feel like he was really good about keeping everything positive, even though I knew a lot of times he was stressed out. He was not really one to complain about his work, which again, I think it really helped with the narrative from my perspective of understanding, okay, my dad is out doing this job that he loves, that he feels good about, and I felt proud of him. I felt inspired by him, and I felt lucky that he was working so hard to help provide for our family. And that's what every daughter wants to feel. We don't want to feel our own guilt for our dads having to go to work. And also, the narrative that you can express to your daughter, whether you like your job or not, is that you do this because you love her and you want to provide for her and that you care about her so much, which again will just help her understand why you work so much if that is your balance. And, if you are a really you have a really demanding job, then that'll help your daughter understand why you spend so much time at work. And it's not something that will allow her to story tell and feel like you're prioritizing this over her when she knows that you do this for her and you do it because you love her so much. So I think that's a really important message too. Um, but yeah, so my dad, he included me in his work world a lot. He actually took me to the office often on weekends when he would have to go. So, that's another example of he had to work hard. He worked extra on the weekends and he would just take us with him to the office. My sisters and I would go run around and we would draw floor plans on the back of some blueprints that were old. And there was one time that I got in trouble, and I will share that just because it is a funny story and it's a good reminder to watch your daughter if you're bringing her to work, even if she's tends to be a pretty good girl. So I was at the office. It was a weekend, and I had this brilliant, funny idea to write "You're fired" and put it on a sticky note and put it on someone's desk. So that's what I did. And my dad went to work on Monday, and I guess this lady was really not happy about this "you're fired" note, rightfully so. At the time, I thought it was really funny. I understand now as an adult why that's not so funny. And as it turns out, this girl was potentially, her job wasn't super secure. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I got a little talking to on Monday night. But it was a good conversation about why we don't do that. So that's just kind of a little side story. But anyways, he did bring me to work a lot. He really included me in what was going on at work, and I felt like I really knew my dad. I've always known my dad. I've always known what he has been working on, and I know him as a person because we got to spend a lot of time doing things that he enjoyed, like golf and like going camping and fun things like that. So overall, remember for the framework, it really comes down to communication, expectations, and inclusion. Okay, so for the dads out there who feel like, oh no, I wish I knew this sooner, or my daughter's not young anymore, I messed up? I want to let you know that for these kinds of conversations, it is never too late. I was recently at a conference and a woman there asked me what I did for work. And when I told her about Girl Dad, I saw her eyes light up. And she told me that when she was growing up, she had a terrible relationship with her dad. Her dad was always working or gone for work, and he never seemed to have time for her, never knew how old she was, who her friends were, what she cared about. She just felt really disconnected from him. And when she was 18 and going off to college, she finally told him exactly how she felt. And she said that as she told him, he broke down. And he told her that when he was growing up, his family really struggled with money and it was a huge source of anxiety. So when she was born, he made it his life's mission to make sure that she never felt the way that he felt when he was growing up. So this whole time, he was working so hard just to make sure that she never felt the feelings of anxiety that he had felt when he was a child. And I think this is so important to hear because it just goes back to that man versus women, way of thinking and not understanding the other person's perspective and how detrimental that can be. And the other thing that's really important about this story is that after this conversation, their relationship was healed because they had a really great talk about that. They talked about out everything. And she told him what's really important to her is communication and being there for her. And she doesn't really care as much about the work. She doesn't really care as much about the money. And I think that was really important for him to hear because now he was able to shift his focus. And she told me that after that conversation, her dad began to call her, ask about what was going on in her world. And she said to this day, as a adult woman, he still calls her all the time and checks in with her and he knows what she's up to. He knows what she cares about. And she said their relationship is stronger than ever. And I do want to mention that it takes a lot of courage for a young woman to tell her dad how she's feeling about this kind of a thing. And I want you to be aware of that because you can be proactive, and maybe your daughter's not one to bring this kind of a thing up. But if you know about it, then you can communicate with her, you can set proper expectations, and you can include her in your world so that from her perspective, the work-life balance is better than ever. And then from your perspective, you can continue to work on your work-life balance and feeling good about it. I want everybody to feel good about their work-life balance. I think that we owe it to ourselves. Otherwise, we're just going to be in this, constant hamster wheel trying so hard to finally break through it and achieve this thing. And that's just not realistic. We've got to start to find peace in where we're at right now. And I think that the best way to do that, just going back to the goal setting, is making sure that you're feeling good about how you're achieving your goals at work and how you're showing up for your family and life. And it'll look different for everybody, but you can focus on those things. And then from the daughter perspective, focus on communication, expectations, and inclusion. And you will be just absolutely golden when it comes to work-life balance. Well, that is it for today's discussion on work-life balance. I hope you found this valuable. And if you have any feedback or any questions, please reach out to me directly. My email is madeline@girldadthebook.com. You can also DM me on Instagram at Girl Dad Network. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to chatting more next Thursday. Thank you for tuning in to Girl Dad the podcast. If you found today's conversation helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow girl dad. I read every review and truly take your words to heart. To close out, remember, your intentional moments make lasting legacies. See you next week.